In 1943, Lucille Byard was admitted to the Washington Adventist Hospital. But when they discovered that she was an African American, she was immediately transferred to Freedman's Hospital on the campus of Howard University, where she tragically died sometime later. For the Brethren, that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Because of the negative publicity associated with Lucille Byard's death, the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the spring of 1944, exactly 1 year later, voted regional conferences into existence. But did the leadership think that black men could lead? Were they convinced that black men could be good administrators? Did they have confidence that black men who had never functioned as conference leaders and administrators because they had never been given a chance, that they could successfully grow the work under their administration? Join me for part 2 of the Elder Fred Crowe interview. And this time, Elder Crowe will also be joined by my mentor and former president of the Allegheny East Conference, Elder Alvin Kibble. Here is that interview. Elder Crowe, when we ended the last episode, we were talking about you. It was time for your ordination, and you ultimately were ordained in the Lake Region Conference. I get that part. But it's 1944. It's your 5th year in ministry. You started in 1939. It's 1944. It's your 5th year in ministry. It's time for you to be ordained in the Indiana Conference. But you weren't ordained in the Indiana Conference. So my question to you is, how is it that you were not ordained in the Indiana Conference and you ended up being ordained in the Lake Region Conference when you were in Indiana? How did that happen?
Well, we were in Indiana and they decided to ordain us, but then decided that since they were about to organize the Lake Region Conference, that they would allow the Lake Region Conference to do the ordaining. Now, during that ordaining service, George Vanderman was there, and Dunbar, Henry, and I. We were all due to be ordained at the same time. But Elder S.E. White, who was the president, said, well, since we're going to organize a new conference, let the new conference ordain these brethren. So at the Indiana ordination, George Vanderman was ordained, and we weren't, and our ordination was carried over to the new organization, which was the Lake Region Conference.
Was your membership transferred from Indiana to Lake Region, and you were now Lake Region Conference pastors, or were you still affiliated with Indiana, even though you were ordained by Lake Region? How did that work?
After they organized the Lake Region Conference, okay, then we were ordained. We were ordained in, as I said before, in Detroit, Michigan. Elder N.F. Brewer was there from the General Conference. Elder J.J. Nethery was there from the Lake Region Conference. And, of course, Elder Dason was the president of the Lake Region Conference. Elder Nethery was from the Lake Union. Elder Dason was the president of the Lake Region Conference. So we were organized between the offering and the announcements. We were called up from the audience, and Elder Dason said, we have 3 brethren to be ordained. They were Elder Jonathan Allison, Elder Dunbar Henry, and myself. And it was done very beautifully, but it was all over in 15 minutes. And we went back and took our seats, and that was it.
Elder Crowe, tell me, in 1943, 1944, when you hear that regional conferences are going to be formed, what was your opinion? Were were the black preachers, were they excited about the new formation of these new conferences that was going to be administered by African Americans? What was the attitude of the guys in the field about the formation of these regional conferences? What were you thinking about that?
Well, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew something had to happen. We felt that the Lord was in the plan. We felt that we had men of our color who were leaders, who were unrecognized, men who were ordained of God as preachers. They weren't trained as leaders and presidents and so forth, but they had innate ability that they didn't know they had. And when these brethren were elected to these positions, they took to these positions like ducks take to water. Brilliant men, such as Elder Cheatham, Frank Bland, Lewis Bland, H.W. Kibble, Harold Singleton, T.M. Rowe. These are all great men of great minds, but they hadn't been accessible to the work. They didn't have these positions, but God had given them executive ability that they were ready to use as soon as they were elected. And as soon as they were elected, these men took to these positions like duck took to water. The Lord blessed them marvelously. We didn't know that they had this ability. They didn't know they had it, but God had blessed them with it. Whereas some of these white brethren were trained, and our black brethren weren't trained formally, but God gave them this outstanding ability to be leaders, and they demonstrated, and it's been demonstrating ever since the organization of black conferences because of the great growth that has happened under their leadership.
Elder Kibble, Elder Crowe just mentioned a number of great pioneers. My question to you is, how indebted are we to those men and great women back in those days, to the contributions that they have made to this work and the benefits that we enjoy today? How indebted are we to those individuals?
We stand on their shoulders. Had they not had the courage and the temerity to take charge, I don't know what would have become of the Adventist Church, particularly where black people are concerned. Booker T. Washington, Du Bois had said over and over again that the success and that the future for us was in being self-reliant. And that's what they demonstrated. I believe, and I've heard this so often, that when John Wagner and the leaders met together after the crisis that had occurred with Lucy Byers, their resolve was, brethren, this is our chance. This is our chance. Individuals were wondering, what should we do? As you know, in the advancement of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, that Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, they threw up their hands. But our leaders said, this is our chance. We can show them, let's show them that we can do this. That was their resolve.
Why didn't they walk away? Why didn't they walk away like Jones and Allen and start a whole new movement? Why the resolve? Why did they decide we're not leaving, this is our church? Why?
I believe that they embraced the the message of the Adventist Church, that it was a worldwide movement. I think that they saw their destiny as being a part of the three angels, this global effort to embrace the world with the three angels' messages. I think that that was at the heart of and the core of their being. And so rather than walking away from the church, they wanted to demonstrate that we can make this thing work.
What kind of catalyst was Lucy Byard's death for that movement?
It was, in fact, the straw that broke the camel's back at that point. And understand that as early as the ordination of Charles Kinney, he asked for our own organization at his ordination.
1891.
In 1889.
89.
But they pushed it aside. But that was the thing. It was the litmus at that point as to whether or not we were going to implode, or whether or not we were going to use this to expand and to go forward.
There's no definitive answer to the question I'm about to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If her tragic death had not occurred April 1943, when do you think regional conferences could have and would have been birthed into existence? Since it was the catalyst that brought it about 1 year later.
You've heard it said that God uses our stumbling blocks to be our stepping stones. Mm-hmm. I believe that it was providential. I think it was a part of the providence of God, taking those events. God has his sovereign will, and he has his permissive will. Did he desire the church to be segregated? No. But, and Ellen White captures this in her early writings, without this structure, the Adventist church would not have succeeded. In the South, had individuals tried to bring white people into an integrated church, it would have been dead in the water. It was not going to happen because of the will of man. It was not going to happen. And so the idea of empowering black people to operate in tandem, with the other organizations was really incredible. It was genius, because the church would never have gone anywhere trying to integrate the minds of white people in America in those days. It was not going to happen. They were too captured by culture.
Wow.
A lot of times we think idealistically. Does God use events like this? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And sometimes it will take a war.
Wow.
But his sovereign will reign. It will be supreme.
Amen. By and by, it will. Elder Crowe, in April 1944, the General Conference leadership votes to establish regional conferences. And in spite of the fact that the white leadership of the church voted these conferences into existence, do you think, Elder Crowe, that they thought that black pastors would make good administrators?
When the idea was first put forth, the brethren had made up in their minds that even though black leadership was elected, that they wouldn't endure over 6 months. It was on this basis that they decided to go ahead and organize. I believe if they had any idea that the work was going to progress as it did among the blacks, they never would have voted it.
Wow.
At that time, it was going to come in time, but not at that time.
Wow.
But as Elder Kibble says, this situation that happened in Washington hastened the time that they had to do something about it because they had so much bad publicity. And the brethren in Washington had been demanding representation at the General Conference. But E.L. McElhaney, at the time, who was president, said, don't mention that till the Lord came. It will never happen. As far as they were concerned, it was never going to happen. But Elder J.J. Nethery, at that time, who was president of Lake Union Conference, said, brethren, why don't we give the brethren an opportunity? Let them start at the bottom. Rather than have representation at the General Conference, why don't we organize local conferences and give these brethren leadership privileges? Now, the white brethren didn't think they would last over 6 months. And in fact, some of them said a little later the worst thing they ever did was to organize black conferences, biggest mistake they ever made. But they decided to, Elder Nethery said, let's organize local conferences. And the General Conference says, well, Elder Nethery, since you made this suggestion, why don't we do it in your union, which was at that time the Lake Union. And so we organized the Lake Region Conference in the Lake Union. Now, most conferences take in one state, but they gave us an almost impossible task. We only had 2,000 members scattered over the entire Lake Union Conference. Now, we had the Michigan Conference, which entailed one state, Wisconsin Conference, another state, Illinois, which was another state, and Indiana. They were all different conferences in the Lake Union, in a small territory. But we had the whole union as one conference, and that was almost an impossible task. So they handed us an almost impossible task to perform with 2,000 members, and promised, well, let them start. And in 6 months, they will throw their hands up in desperation and say, brethren, we can't do it. We thought we could, but we can't, so take us back, please. That was the attitude of the white brethren in the General Conference. They thought we would never fail, but they underestimated the brilliance and intelligence of these black leaders, as I mentioned, these great men who were born leaders. So we took the Lake Region Conference and we organized it, and we had one central theme, and that was evangelism. That was the only thing that would keep us alive. So every minister, every member was an evangelist, and we grew and we grew and we grew. And Monty Solon, who became the one of the secretaries of the General Conference, said that before the organization of regional conferences, the work of America was minimal. But after we organized regional conferences, the work took off like wildfire. And he attributed the growth in North America to the regional conferences because we grew so fast. Now, Lake Region Conferences, as I said before, started out with 2,000 members scattered all over the Lake Union. But we grew and we grew and we grew. Our workers used the word evangelism as a byword, and we grew so fast that today the Lake Region Conference is no longer the smallest conference in the Union. It's the largest one, larger than Michigan. And the work has grown by leaps and bounds. So Monty Solon, the secretary, one of the secretaries of the General Conference, says the great work in America, North America, is due to the fact that we organize regional conferences.
Elder Kibble,
When we organized the regional conferences in '44, there were only 11,000 black Seventh-day Adventists in North America. By 1950, we had 23,000. By 1960, we had 37,000. By 1970, we had 80,000. By 1990, we had 190,000. And then by 2000, we had 260,000. That's the growth that Elder Crowe was talking about. And it was stimulated by what we referenced earlier, self-determination. It was by creating the opportunity for black leaders to advance the work through their self-discipline, their creativity, their determination. We have what we have today.
That's right.
But they understood what the mission was. And Elder G.E. Peters, during that debate whether or not we should have conferences or not have the conferences, his statement was, whatever is going to bring black people into this church, that is what we need to do. And what people don't understand today is that structure is defined by mission. In other words, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, the structure of the organization is what determines that. So there's a difference between the way an airline operates and the way that a grocery store operates, because it has a different purpose. Structure is what is defined by mission. So we ask ourselves, well, in terms of the organization of the church today, what is the most efficient way to operate a world church? And what is what are the catalysts that will help to advance the work? Should a Eurocentric approach toward organization be the only thing that that is being considered? When the indigenous people of the African divisions had learned the message of the church and the mission of the church, when they reached the maturity where they felt confident, they sent the expatriates home. It was then that the growth in the church blew up.
That's right.
It was when they sent the white leaders home because they had the capacity, they understood, they have a way of doing things that perhaps it is more conducive for their culture.
Elder Crowe, you shared a story with me that our audience needs to hear. You mentioned that after the formation of regional conferences, Lake Region was the very first conference that was organized in 1945, that a contingent of Africans approached you. Contingent of Africans approached you and had a conversation with you. Share that conversation.
Yes, a number of years later at the General Conference, after Africa had come to the place where they sent delegates from their natives to the General Conference, they approached me and they said, "You're Elder Crowe, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Now, you don't know us, but we know you." I said, "Well, how do you know me?" Well, they said in 1944, when they organized regional conferences, all of Africa had their eyes on Chicago, where you folks are organizing a black conference. And we knew that if you folks were successful in organizing a conference led by blacks, we could do the same thing. Now, our leaders told us that what you were trying to do in North America would never work. And when you organize, you will only be in existence 6 months. So don't get any ideas over here. You'll never have any leaders from over here, because leadership is always going to be white here. Because you see, at the General Conference, division leaders are elected, and when they go back to their fields, they appoint the leaders under them. And of course, they were all white. All the presidents of unions and local conferences and directors of mission fields were all white because they were appointed. That's why when you go to General Conference, when you see the sign African Division, all white folks are there because they're all white workers. No members of the constituency are delegates. That's the way it was back there. So when you folks were organized, that gave us great hope. And what you folks did set the pace for us here in Africa. And we demanded leadership. And now when you go to General Conference now, when you see the sign says East African Division, it's all black folks. Before this happened, they were all white folks. And I remember when we were first organized, the first General Conference, the floor was almost all white. Left to me was East Africa, it was all white. Before me was Inter-America, they were all white delegates. But now, it's turned completely. About 80% of the floor of delegates now are black folks. All of this happened after the organization of regional conferences. So we integrated the church. Mm. The first place of integration in the church was the Union Committee. You see, the union, there was no integration in any of the 40 conferences in North America or the unions, all white. But when we organized a local conference, that put your union, your local president, on the committee of the union and also on the board of the college, you see.
That's right. And
I had quite an experience with the college there.
Yeah, we're gonna come to that.
Come to that. But that was a setup back there in those days, and that's what these Africans say. We appreciated what you did because that gave us great hope.
Mercy. Elder Kibble, let me ask you, there are a number of individuals in our church today, African American and Caucasian, who are calling for the dissolution and the abandonment of regional conferences. Do they understand? Because I just listening to Elder Crowe, in preparation for this taping, just listening to this story about the Africans, I never connected the dots. I never connected the dots from what took place in America that it had any impact around the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Do they understand that this changed the game?
Many do not. I said to the Time magazine reporter that interviewed me about a month ago that the organization of regional conferences within the Seventh-day Adventist Church was the first time that the Adventist Church began to integrate corporately. Mm-hmm. It was the essence of integrating the corporate organization of the church. Mm-hmm. Because of what Elder Crowe just said, that through structure and without structure, there is minimal representation. Mm-hmm. In order for a church to be represented at a conference session, it has to be organized. Mm-hmm. If it is not organized, there is no representation. Without a conference, there is no organization at the union level and thereon throughout the organization. And so the structure is what gave voice and privilege. And without that, we would never have arisen. The first human relationship document that the church ever drew up were the 16 points that were organized as a result of the appeal of regional conferences. And so many not understanding the dynamics, they see this as insulary. But these are core. Recently, Elder Jan Paulson created a new structure in the church called Union of Churches. This came about as a result of the growth of non-indigenous people in Scandinavia and in Europe, where the indigenous people were marginalized because of the larger growth of individuals who are immigrants. And so they were looking for a way in which the indigenous people, the white people of Europe, could have self-determination and a seat at the world church. So they had to create a structure for that. And they call it Union of Churches. They leapfrogged over the local conference and established these churches as a union entity, because there is no seat at the world table unless you have a union structure. The building block of the world church are unions. And so, again, that need for self-determination.
Elder Crowe, you become a member of the Lake Region Conference, and you hold a position in the Lake Region Conference. What was that position?
I was elected to the office of Secretary Treasurer. At those days, from the union down, whoever was the secretary was the treasurer, even at the union. Now, of course, they have a secretary and a treasurer, and local conferences also have secretaries and treasurer. But in those days, whoever was the secretary was the treasurer, so I was elected to that position.
As treasurer of the Lake Region Conference, how often did the union auditor come down to audit your books?
Well, ordinarily, they
in those days, back in those days when you first got started.
Well, today they come twice a year. In those days, they had whoever the auditor was a union employee, but today they have general conference auditors. That was because the union auditors didn't get along too well with the local treasurers, and they were easily displaced and mistreated by the local conferences. But so they decided to establish the auditors from the general conference. Well, they used to come about once a year, but in the place of my conference, my auditor came about once a month without notice. Now, usually the auditors let you know when they're coming so you can get your books in order and so forth. But they weren't too sure about a new local conference under black leadership. And so instead of waiting until a month to come or a year to come, the auditor from our conference came to my office once a month without invitation, without announcement, just showed up. They weren't too sure we were going to do the right thing or whether we knew what to do the right thing or not. But I give credit to the union auditors. They were very kind and they were very helpful to us. because we were new at what we were doing. You see, in an office, the only person who is required to have academic training are the treasurers. Now, you can become a president if you're a good pastor of a church or something. You can become elected to become president of a conference without any formal training at all. Or youth leader, you perhaps a good youth leader in your church, you can be elected to youth leader in the conference. Or if you're a good salesman in books, you can become a publishing secretary in the conference. But to treasure, you've got to have some academic training to become a treasurer. You can't just appoint anybody to the position of treasurer because he's handling funds, and he's responsible to report to unions, to the general conference, and to the government. So you have to have a special trained person. Well, I had training as an accountant, and that's why they elected me as treasurer of the conference, but I didn't know the system. I had to go to the Illinois conference to sit and go over their books, and E.L. Green, who was the secretary treasurer of the Illinois conference, was very helpful to show me the system. And so we put the system into action, and then we were ready to operate, you see. So that's why they elected me as treasurer of the conference, because I had some training along that line.
Elder Kipple, you grew up in the Lake Region Conference. I believe you know this man well.
Yes, I do.
Talk about his contributions to Lake Region.
Oh, mercy.
But beyond that, talk about his contribution to the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Growing up,
See, I understand why I'm here. Okay? I'm here on assignment by my president, Elder Henry J. Fordham, to capture this rich history that we need to pass down to our children and our grandchildren who don't know this history. Why are you here? Because you didn't have to be here. You are here because you chose to be here because of this man. Talk about this man.
Elder Frederick Nathan Crowe is one of the giants, in my estimation, of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because he represented a special caliber of leader who believed enough in God that he fostered the faith that nothing was impossible. Our conferences started without anything.
That's right.
The treasurer of the South Atlantic Conference said on more than one occasion that they started without a desk or a typewriter. These were individuals who had to believe enough in their calling that they would not settle for less than success. They knew that God had called them and had appointed them. These men did not have the affirmation from other leaders of the church. There was nobody to affirm them. So they had to do what Jesus had to do. He had to encourage himself. The work wasn't easy. It's never easy when you're trying to scale mountains, whether they're mountains of personal issues or mountains of other kinds. It's never easy, but it takes a certain independence and interdependence. They created the the networks that they needed, building relationships with leaders, thought leaders within the church. I think about how my dad would go and court a relationship with Dr. R.M. Howard, who was a doctor and a member of the Lake Region Conference. He would sit down and talk with him, and I can remember coming down to Nashville, Tennessee, and visiting with Dr. Dent, and trying to build this relationship with others that would help to grow the resources of their conferences. These are mighty individuals, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. Growing up, we admired them. They were bigger than life to us. We didn't go many places where we saw black men in charge of anything. Mm-hmm. But here within the structure of our church were leaders that we could identify with. Black people, black men were not given those opportunities. Even in the telling of the story of the Morning Star, growing up as a boy, I didn't know that Edson White didn't know anything about the Mississippi. I didn't know that Will Palmer was the little teenage boy who actually was the captain by night because he couldn't be the captain by day. It would have been to my joy to have known that this little black kid was the captain of the Morning Star. But black men could not be given that kind of visibility. I don't know whether it was fear or jealousy. But Elder Crowe was for us what Jackie Robinson was for baseball. And he didn't need necessarily to as they often refer to it in the industry. I'm trying to think of the word. He earned the right himself. This was not something that was given him because they wanted to do something nice for a black man. He brought the credentials with him. All he needed was the chance. Amen. Amen. He didn't need, what's that term called? It escapes me. It was almost there on the tip of my tongue.
Affirmation?
It may come back to me, but I can't remember right now.
Elder Crowe, as the Secretary Treasurer of the Lake Region Conference, you were invited along with all of the Secretary Treasurers of the Lake Union to attend a meeting along with the presidents. And it was at this meeting that you stood up and you made a very, very impassioned appeal and plea. Share with us what you shared with those men in that room that day.
Yes, well, we have to regress a little bit to give you a background of that meeting. Before we organized the Lake Region Conference, I was pastoring in the Indiana Conference in South Bend, Indiana. South Bend is about 37 miles east of Emmanuel Missionary College. And we had students that attended my church on a regular basis from Emmanuel Missionary College, and I was happy to have them.
They were African American?
African Americans, several of them, came to my church, ministerial students. I had them preach for me on Sabbath many times. So I asked them, why would you folks want to leave Emmanuel Missionary College, where they have the beautiful Founders Church that they have built up there, and come to my little church in South Bend? They said, Elder Crowe, they practice the worst form of segregation in Emmanuel Missionary College that we know about. It's terrible. We're embarrassed. We're segregated, and we can't do anything about it. What can you do about it? I said, well, that's terrible. How are you segregated? Well, we're segregated in the dining room. Black students are steered to certain tables, and white students are steered to other tables. In social activities, the black students aren't permitted to skate with the white students. Now, the white girls, they're the ones who ask our black boys to teach them to skate, because these black boys skate like professionals. White boys, they skate right ahead, straight ahead, but the black boys, they spin around and they do unusual things. And we wanted to dance, we wanted to
Skate with them.
Skate with them. Well, you know, when you skate, you don't just hold hands. You have to wrap your arms around whoever you're skating with, and you act as one when you're skating, you see.
And that was a no-no.
Well, the faculty members who were in charge of the social activities noticed this, that these white girls were skating with these black boys all close up together, so they complained to the administration. The administration sent word down that there should be no more interracial skating, no more interracial activities as far as social contact's concerned, and there should be total segregation in the dining room. And that's the way it was to be. Well, these students told me this, and they asked me if I couldn't do something about it. I said, well, you know, I would like to do something about it. I have nobody to appeal to. Everybody above me is white. I'm in a white conference. We don't have no black conference at the time. My president is white. In fact, his name is white. So what can I do? I have nobody to appeal to. I said, what you do, form a committee of students and go to Elder Nethery, who is the chairman of the board of this college, who was the president of the Lake Union, and explain to him what's happening, and I'm sure he'll be able to help you out, because I can't do anything about it. I wish I could. Well, they took my advice, and they went to Elder Nethery, and they explained how they were being treated, segregated at this Adventist college. Elder Nethery said, well, brethren, if you don't like what they're doing here, you can go to Oakwood. They don't have any segregation down there at Oakwood. And they left them with that. Now that's the background. In the meantime, when I couldn't do anything and nobody else was doing anything about it, we organized the Lake Region Conference. Well, that put Elder Dason, who is our president, on the committee of the Lake Union Conference and also on the board of the Emmanuel Missionary College. Well, they had a meeting one time. Now, the treasurers weren't members of the college board, but they had a financial problem that they thought the treasurers could give them some help on. So at this meeting, they invited all the treasurers of the union come in. Treasurer of Michigan, treasurer of Wisconsin, treasurer of Indiana, treasurer of Illinois, and treasurer of the Lake Region, which was me. So we were invited to this meeting as guests, one-time guests. So when they opened this meeting, I said, this is my opportunity. Now, I wasn't as middle as I am today. I was just about 27 years old. And I stood up and I said, brethren, I'd like to make a statement and get some answers from my questions. I understand that you practice segregation here in this institution. The students from this college have came to me and told me that you segregate them in the dining room. This was perhaps before you went there.
Yes.
segregate them in the dining room, they segregate them in the social activities, they segregate them all through the college. I said, now, brethren, this ought not to be. I said, Emmanuel Missionary College is in Michigan, and Michigan is one of the most liberal states of the Union. Right up the road at Ann Arbor is Michigan, University of Michigan, with 22,000 students. No segregation whatsoever in that institution. You go right around the corner at Lansing, there's Michigan State University. That's where Magic Johnson played basketball. They don't have any segregation there. And they have several denominational schools throughout Michigan that are all integrated. I said, this is the only segregated college in Michigan. I said, brethren, this should not be so, and we must make a change. Well, everything was very quiet. All the treasurers from the local conferences, all the presidents from the local conferences, and all the other members of the college board, eyes on me. I said, now, brethren, unless changes are made here, I have no alternative except to go back to my hometown in Chicago and go to the Chicago Tribune, go to the Chicago Sun-Times, go to the Chicago Daily News, and go to the Chicago Defender and tell them what's happening up here in this university. I said, this is what I'm going to do, and I took my seat. No more was said. Next day, word came down from the president of the college, no more discrimination in Emmanuel Missionary College. No more discrimination in social activities. No more discrimination in the dining room. This is a discrimination-free institution. That happened overnight. And very next year, they hired Dr. Burrell from Oakwood to become on the faculty member. So Emmanuel Missionary College was changed overnight.
Amen.
And I said, praise the Lord.
Amen. Man. It takes bold people
Been
like you.
integrated ever since.
Ever since. There's one more story before we conclude this taping, Elder Crowe, that you must tell. You had to visit the General Conference at that time. It was in Tacoma Park. I think you were going there to take care of some insurance issues for the conference or seeking some information about insurance for the conference, etc. And you knew someone in the General Conference building at the time. Tell us that story.
Well, I had to go to Washington, D.C. during the early days of our conference to take care of some insurance business, because at that time the General Conference insured all of our properties. So I had to make sure that all the properties in the Lake region were insured. So I had an appointment with the insurance department that afternoon. But in the morning I didn't have anything to do, so I said, well, what I'll go visit Elder Peters. General Conference at that time was located in Tacoma Park, which is a very secluded place. Beautiful big building, and next door was the Review and Herald, had 3 floors. So I walked up to the receptionist and I said, I'd like to see Elder Peters. And they said, oh yes, Elder Peters, you go right around the corner there and you'll see an elevator, and you press the down button and you go to Elder Peters' office. I said, that's mighty strange, a down button. So I went around the corner and I pressed the down button and I got down there. It was dark. I saw a light, said the Negro Department in the basement. So I walked and knocked on the door, and Elder Peters invited me, and I knew him. He said, come in, Elder Crowe. I said, Elder Peters, I said, what are you doing down here? Elder Peters, you know, was a very astute gentleman, very immaculate, West Indian brother, patent leather shoes, and dressed immaculately. Everything was just right. He said, this is where they got me, brother. This is where they got me. I said, but you're in the basement. He said, this is where they got me. So I let that go because it was getting embarrassing. He didn't want to talk about it. So about that time, Elder Peters said, well, it's about noon, Brother Crowe. Would you like to have dinner with me? I said, yes. So we'll go upstairs at the cafeteria and get some food, and I'll take care of it. So we went around the corner and pressed the up button. We went up to the second floor, and we were introduced to this beautiful dining room. Beautiful table, linen, everything, very nice. So Elder Peter said, just get whatever you want. So I got my tray and I walked around, I got my food and I started toward the table. Elder Peter said, no, brother, you can't sit there. So I said, well, evidently this is reserved for somebody. So I went to another table and he said, oh, you can't sit there, brother. And I said, well, evidently this is a reserved table. So I went to the third table and he said, I can't sit there. I said, well, Brother Elder Peters, where can I sit? Elder Peters said, well, follow me. So I followed him. We went out of the room, round the corner, elevator, pressed the down button, went down to the basement to his office. And that's where we had our dinner. I said, Elder Peter, why are we eating down here? He said, brother, the blacks and whites don't eat together here in this conference. No, nobody eats together. We eat down here and the white folks eat upstairs. And that's the way it was.
Mercy, mercy. I got one last.
And in the general conference office, there was not one black person working anywhere else except in Elder Peter's office. I think it has 3 stories there in that Tacoma Park, not one. But since we organize black conferences, and since we have integrated the union, integrated the division, integrated the general conference, when you go to the general conference office now and walk up and down the halls, you're prone to ask, where are the white folks? Black folks everywhere in every department. Black girls typing letters, department leaders, department assistants, department secretaries, completely integrated. This church has come from the most disintegrated church to the most integrated church in the world today. And all of this has happened since the organization of regional conferences. So when I hear these brethren talking about going back to where we were before, I say, brethren, don't even mention it. It will never happen. It's never in God's will. Let it die, because instead of doing away with black conferences, as we grow, we ought to organize more black conferences, because as we organize black conferences, we disintegrated the church more and more and more and more. That's where we are today, in a period of great disintegration in the church. When you go to the general conference now, it's a pleasure to look down on the floor at the delegates and see how we're mixed up down there. In fact, we're 80% black on the floor, whereas before we had none. This has been God's plan all the time.
Amen. Elder Kibble, I'm going to end with you. Where do we go from here?
I think what Elder Crowe has shared with us this afternoon is really it's an example of how God can take us in our undone condition, in all of our brokenness and do something that is truly beautiful in His sight. The fact is that it took that experience that we often reflect on to bring this about. That was the table where God had to break the clay and remold it and put it back on the wheel. We had to go through it all over again because we could never be the example, even to the larger society, without that. You go to the General Conference today, and it is just amazing to see the representation of people from all over the world. And they're in the communications department. They're in the IT department. They're, you look at the in-house building management. Once again, you're seeing we couldn't even be janitors in the office before. Our institutions were just totally segregated. But it was really the regional conferences. When Loma Linda Foods was not integrated, Worthington Foods was not integrated, Pacific Press was not integrated, the Review and Herald was not integrated. So it wasn't just the church.
All the institutions.
And because we had so many institutions, we had more opportunity to discriminate than many entities. We were once one of the most racist institutions in America. But we have this message that is the antithesis of that. And it started with regional conferences.
That's right.
So now, what does that say to us as regional leaders? How will we manage the multiple cultures of our conferences? How will we manage? How will we provide voice and vote representation? How will we oversee our institutions? Having had this history, will we seek for opportunities to bring people to the table? Will we rely on, or will we depend on bylaws, or will we give consideration from our values, from our worldview, from a better informed human dynamic? That's what I think we take away from it. This idea of giving people self-determination is really what Christ is all about.
Okay.
He doesn't bring us to the table as second-class citizens or as stepchildren. And who knows it better than those of us who have tread this path?
That's right.
Amen. Amen. Well, gentlemen, I can't tell you how enlightening, how rewarding this has been for me. All I know is I am privileged and honored to be a part of a process that records our history for our posterity. Because our children and our grandchildren are growing up in this church, and they're asking questions, and they're providing answers. And the answers that they're giving and the comments that they're making is proof positive that they don't know our history. So I'm honored to be a part of this process. I'm honored to be a part of the Allegheny East Conference, and I thank both of you for making the sacrifices that you've made to make this possible, so we can share this with the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes part 2 of this episode, so stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. Slavery, with its concomitant Jim Crow racism, is the original sin of America, particularly because America has not apologized for nor atoned for its racist practices against its own citizens. Consequently, the stain of racism against America remains on the books of heaven. Similarly, the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in North America and across the globe has never appropriately apologized for its Jim Crow racism and its Adventist version of South African apartheid. That notwithstanding, the accomplishments of the leaders of the black work in the 1940s and onward, because of the church's double standards in policy and practice towards its own constituents, is tantamount, like the Jews of old, to being forced to make bricks without straw. But because God was on their side, today we have 9 regional conferences, a historically black university, my alma mater, Oakwood University, a boarding academy, Pine Forge Academy, which is one of 4 boarding academies in the country and has been in operation since 1946. Several day academies, many elementary schools, hundreds of churches, if not thousands, several 100,000 constituents, as well as hundreds of millions of dollars in tithes and offerings. It goes without saying that this church would not and could not be the same without us. This series is a tribute to all of the men and women who, like Elder Fred Crowe, sacrificed their lives to leave people like you and I this incredible legacy. We owe them an eternal debt of gratitude. Amen. On behalf of my partner, Charles Williams, the entire AEC Media Center, and my former president, Elder Henry J. Fordham III, who produced and funded this series, I am Pastor Frank E. Leggett III. Be blessed. I'll see you next time.